Hey, live stream world. Welcome back. Episode 17, The Human Factor, Marketing and Sales for People, Not Robots. This is your co-host, Allan Langer, with my other co-host, Stephen Brown over in Texas. And we've got a great guest today that I'm going to let Stephen introduce because he knows Michael more than I do. But we've got Michael Bosworth, a sales guru, and a guy who's been in the field for many, many years, a published author of many books. Really cool dude. So I want to welcome myself. I want to welcome Michael to the show myself. And then Steve, why don't you say hello and then introduce our guest and tell the audience about what we're about to experience today with Mr. Bosworth. Uh-oh, is Steve frozen?
Did Steve hear you there?
Steve is welcome to the world of live streaming.
I know. Yeah. Well, hopefully Steve can get unfrozen.
Yeah, if he gets unfrozen, I'm sure he will. But Mike, thanks for joining us on the show. Hopefully people are hearing us right now. So why don't you, while we're waiting for Steve, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got into sales and started writing all these great books. So
well, I'll try and do the abbreviated version, but I had the good fortune to, out of college after 13 months in Vietnam. I went to Cal Poly Pomona on the GI Bill and graduated in 1972 with a degree in marketing. And I had the good fortune to get an entry-level job with Xerox Computer Services. And Xerox Computer Services created cloud computing. And I don't see either of you guys on my screen right now. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute. Okay, there we go.
There we go. He's back. Steve is back.
I'm back and I'm producing.
Yeah.
Yes, he's the producer. So I was like, Steve, why don't you introduce Mike? And then you just were there frozen. So why don't we go back to that? You can introduce Mike and then he can start talking about.
All right. Yeah, let's do that.
Michael, thank you so much for being on. So Michael Bosworth, he's the author of 6 books on sales, on what great salespeople do, the 7 stories salespeople should tell, and 4 others. I guess he didn't have anything else to do for a while after he sold.
You're giving me too much credit, Steve. That 7 stories I wrote an intro to, but that wasn't my book.
It wasn't yours. I'm sorry.
Now, anyway, my 3 primary books are solution selling, customer-centric selling, and what great salespeople do.
Well, what great salespeople do is they make it up as they go sometimes when technology is crapping out on them. Michael, proud to have you here. Everybody, Michael is excellent sales man, sales trainer, sales writer. And this is a great conversation that we're going to have. We're going to talk about stories because Allan and I hang around the story brand Prefree. And we use story in the way that we work with our folks, both in marketing and sales. So, Michael, thanks so much for being here.
I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
So, Allan, you're up, brother.
Yeah. So Michael was telling us about how he started his career and he was with Xerox and so why don't you finish that story because. You said you graduated in 1972 with a marketing degree. That stood out to me. Like they actually had marketing degrees back in 1972.
Well, I will tell you that the marketing degree helped me get the entry-level job, but that was about it. I can't remember one single thing in my career that I've used from my business degree at Cal Poly Pomona, other than a ticket to get a job. I gleaned all my expertise at Xerox Computer Services. That was where I got my real training.
So in our conversation on my podcast, Michael, you talked about how you started hustling and doing sales for like the biggest company in the world. But what you started to realize was people needed to see themselves in a story utilizing your product. Right. Kind of talk us through that epiphany, please.
Well, we were selling first generation MRP systems and virtually 100% of our targeted market had no clue what we were selling. It was a new dimension, in data processing, if you will. And So we realized that what we were selling is conceptual, intangible, perceived as expensive, perceived as complicated, and sold to committees. And so what we really had to do was get a potential buyer to trust us enough to admit pain. And then we had to help them visualize how they could make their pain go away if they had certain information, tools, help that they didn't have today, which parentheses was in our product. And so what we ended up doing is focusing on how people buy, because most human beings hate the thought of feeling sold by a salesperson. 99% of humans have had experiences with salespeople where they wanted to take a shower after about 60 seconds. They felt pushed, bullied, manipulated. And so one of the things I've been doing for 45 years is trying to get salespeople to not behave in a way that reminds the buyer of another salesperson. Because as soon as they do, the slime paradigm covers them and in their history. So we ended up with a high difficulty product that nobody knew what it was doing. We somehow realized that if we can help people buy, and if we can learn their psychological buying process, then they're not going to feel pressured, and they can go through their buying process with the seller as a buying facilitator. And what I intuitively was doing back in 1974 when they put me on quota for the first time is I'd walk into a manufacturing plant and I'd a cold call, and I'd go up to the receptionist and say, my name's Mike Bosworth. I'm with Xerox Computer Services, and I'd like to speak to your materials manager. And 80% of the time, that materials manager would come out to the lobby. And it wasn't, this is before they met me, 80%. And if you think back then in 1974, if you'd been out of college for 20, 25 years and you're a high-level person working in a sophisticated manufacturing plant, the only way you could learn anything about new technology in manufacturing was to see salespeople. Mm-hmm. So they were curious. They'd come out. So if you went in and said, I'm from Xerox or Honeywell or Univac or whatever, you had a pretty high probability of having a specific job title come out to the lobby. Problem was when they got to the lobby, I was 28 and they were 48. And as soon as they'd see how young I was, every one of them, they'd do this. They'd look at their watch. And I knew they were saying to themselves, well, now I have to be polite to this guy for 15 minutes before I can give him the boot. Because I'm a nice guy and, I don't want to be an asshole. So, but I did this intuitively, and it took me years to figure out how to do it consciously so I could teach other people. So the 48-year-old materials manager comes out, and I confirm. I say, so you're the materials manager here? And he'd say, yes. And I shake his hand, and I say, I'm Mike Bosworth of Xerox Computer Services. And I'd like to share a quick story with you about another materials manager I've been working with less than a mile from here for the last 18 months. And never once did one of those materials managers turn down that offer of a peer story. Peer curiosity is so huge in the business world, in the B2B selling world for sure. And so he'd say yes to the story. And I had a killer story because I had, with my own hands, helped implement our first MRP system less than a mile from his place. And their materials manager had a spectacular story, which I could tell in 60 seconds. And by the time I was finished with my story, 60 seconds later, the story led him to the emotional conclusions that, God, this guy looks really young, but it sounds like he understands how hard my job is. And gosh, he knows the issues. He knows my problem without me even telling him. And he's helped one of my peers less than a mile from here, solve the biggest problem I have. And so when I would, after 60 seconds, say, but enough about me, what's going on here? The discovery resistance was gone. And most of them say, you want to come in and look around? And that 60-second story removed all the discovery resistance, all the inherent distrust of salespeople. And for the next 45 minutes, I got to go in and ask all my intelligent discovery questions that were written for me by the smartest people in my company. And in my first 5 months on quota, with that one story, I sold more than anybody in the history of the company sold in a full year.
Well, Steve knows, he's probably thinking as I'm listening to all this, is like, this is music to my ears, because this is basically what my whole book's about. I actually, that fear you're talking about, that slime, I actually give it a term in my book, Mike, called riptotrostophobia, where we actually, it's something that starts in our brains at a young age, that we have some event that a salesperson did to us.
Yeah.
And it's in our brain forever. And every time we meet with someone, we get that feeling like, can I trust this person, or is this person going to rip me off?
Yeah.
So what you're talking about is
PTSD almost.
absolutely. So, and then what you're talking about there is brilliant. From the 70s, you were basically using social proof and stories at the, in one combination, which is so powerful for the human brain. It's just like, no wonder why you were successful, because you were the anti-salesperson. You were introducing that emotion of story and social proof at 45 years ago. That's amazing. So really, really cool stuff.
I cheated a little bit though, because I quickly learned, because I've been on the technical application support side for 2.5 years before I went into sales. So I really knew the product cold. And as an application support person, every time you go out to see a customer, they're happy to see you. Oh God, Mike, we're so happy you're here. We're struggling with this. We can't get the inventory transactions to post, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. But when Xerox gave me cards that said marketing representative, and I go out, at a trade show or whatever, and I hand somebody a card, and the salesperson, the risk of trustophobia, whatever it is, comes right out. But I had a whole box of my application support cards. So I dumped the salespeople person cards and continue to use my application consultant cards, and it worked much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Mike, one of the big takeaways from my conversation with you before was the problem with, all the details, what they're experiencing as a salesperson, and you can't wait to say what you need is, and how that's such a big mistake.
Yeah. Well, Neil Rackham actually discovered that in 1979. Big Xerox, my parent company, hired Neil as a behavioral researcher to try and to figure out and to codify why the top 20% salespeople were bringing in 80% of the revenue. Because the problem with top 20% salespeople bringing in 80% of the revenue is, sure enough, they're going to get promoted to sales manager. And as soon as they get promoted to sales manager, they crash and burn.
Yeah.
And the reason they crash and burn is how do you teach other people to do what you do intuitively? And the answer is with great difficulty. And so my career as a sales trainer has been trying to codify what the top salespeople do, or what great salespeople do, and put it into some kind of a model or a process that we can teach the bottom 80%. So they can behave the right way on purpose.
That's absolutely fascinating. And what's interesting? So this morning, I'm doing some research. So I do a lot of, I post a lot of content, Mike, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, on Instagram. So always like sometimes you're like, oh, what should I post today? And there's these cool websites you can go to that kind of shows you what's the top things that have been people are searching for in a topic. Mm-hmm. So I typed in sales tips, and an article from HubSpot comes up, and it was the top conversation sales tips. And number 3 is by a person named Mike Bosworth. And it says, show, not tell. At the moment, you're tempted to tell the buyer what he needs to do, just like Steve said. Instead, offer a story about a peer of the buyer, says Mike Bosworth. So that actually came up this morning as I was doing a search. So I wanted to bring that up because I just found it fascinating that I did a little search on sales tips and Mike Bosworth came up. So
well, I did a TED talk on that exact topic about 5 years ago, but as Steve alluded to, one of the worst things you can do as a salesperson to bring that discovery resistance and that risk phobia back up is to look at your buyer and say, oh, Allan, you're having this problem. We see it all the time. This is out of whack. This is out of whack. This is out of whack, right? Here's what you need. And human beings do not like to be told what they need. And in my workshops, I say, if you don't believe me, guys, how many of you are in a long-term romantic relationship? And 80% of the hands go up. I say on the next break, call that person and try 2 to 3 you need tos on him or her and see how it works. And then they come back and I say, so if the person who in theory loves you more than anybody else in the whole world won't take it from you, why would your buyer?
Right.
And so, but see, that's the key to all this is getting in sync with how people like to buy. And so many technology companies, product marketing screws up the whole process. Because, for instance, the product marketing department of Apple that builds this iPhone, if you were a new salesperson for Apple and product marketing was going to teach you the technology, how many days could they go telling you all the bells and whistles in that phone? It's crazy. And but I had a $3 billion telecommunications company where their product marketing department was in charge of training all new salespeople in the product, right? Mm-hmm. And the majority of those people in product marketing had never spoken to a customer.
Amazing.
So they're telling you all about the product, but they're not telling you how customers use that product to make money, save money, achieve a goal, or solve a problem. So I did a talk a number of years ago and say, can we change your product from a noun to a verb? And the example I gave is I was doing an open solution selling workshop probably 20 years ago in Del Mar, California. And on an open workshop, I go around the room and ask everybody what they sell. Allan, what do you sell? Steve, what do you sell? And most people are selling some high difficulty, complex, intangible, sold to a committee, difficult to just do ROI on, etc. High difficulty selling. That was my world. And I got around to this guy, Richard, and I said, Richard, what do you sell? He said, Mike, I sell glue. And I said, I've never had a glue salesperson go through one of my workshops before. And then as I asked the next question, I almost wanted to grab the words and shove them back in my mouth because I said, I said, so Richard, tell me about the glue. Well, he was a chemical engineer. He had a master's in chemical engineering from MIT. And if you ask an engineer to tell you about the glue, get ready for a long answer. And he started talking about mold and bonding and vibration and all this stuff. And I finally said, whoa, I gave him the timeout. And this was an aha moment for me. I said, Richard, it sounds like you're using that word glue as a noun. can you change it to a verb and tell me about your product? He was a really smart guy, and he immediately shifted and started telling me the gluing his clients and customers do in their production process using his industrial adhesives. And that's the shift that most product marketing departments have not made yet, even in 2021. They're talking about their product as a noun instead of a verb. And so I almost think we should just kill product marketing and create customer usage marketing.
That's a brilliant statement.
You know, I think about the mistakes that I made in sales, and I've done that. Oh, this is going wrong. This is going wrong. This is going wrong. What you need is, and you think about every logical reason exists why they should pick it, but they don't. And it's this illogical problem you didn't solve in their mind. And if you ask them what was the reasoning, they couldn't really say. But what not helping them see themselves in the future in a positive affirmation utilizing your product is what was the problem.
And so, if you lead with a product demo, now you're relying on the buyer's ability to look at all those 100 features and pick out the 3 that they would ever use and situationally think about when they would use that feature. It's almost impossible. And that's because we're out of sync with how people like to buy.
Mm.
And we always have been. And you're right. And still in 2021 with all of that's why the internet it's just internet buying is so popular, because first of all, they don't have to talk to a salesperson. Right. And they can just figure out what they want and purchase it without having that component of, oh my God, I got to talk to the salesperson. But I don't know if
they know what they're buying, great, right?
Yeah,
if they bought it
exactly.
before or whatever, that part of buying, the internet's fantastic for. But if you're a seller selling something new, innovative, different, where the market doesn't understand it yet, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. And Mike, I'm really amazed on how similar we are, because when I do some workshops, I start the same way. I kind of walk around and I say, what do you sell? And what I'm looking for is, I do a lot of, I've been in the construction field a lot. So windows, doors, siding, roofing, things like that. So I'll say, hey, Mike, what do you sell? Like, well, I sell roofs. I'm like, no, you don't. What do you sell? I sell windows. No, you don't. And they're always looking at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, if you sell windows, you don't sell windows. You sell the solution to their drafty living room. You sell the solution to their high energy bills. Well, how do I do that? Oh, well, let me show you a window. You're not selling a window. You're selling the solution to the issue. And Steve's right. You have to put them in the position of understanding what their living room is going to be like without a draft in it. Not just here's my window and look how great it is.
But you're using a dangerous word for salespeople to use.
Yeah, what's that?
Solution.
Yes.
Because when product marketing is done training salespeople, now they're in the sales in the quote unquote sales training. It's all it will do this and it will do that. Meaning the it is our product. It will do this and it will do that. And then when they go out in the sales call, the salesperson in real time changes the word it to our solution. Our solution will do this. Our solution will do that. Well, one, now we're disempowering the buyer. And 2, odds are the buyer hasn't demonstrated trust yet by even admitting a problem to us. And by using the word solution as a salesperson, it's highly presumptuous, because I'm telling him, even though you haven't told me what your problem is, I know what it is, and I know I have what it takes to solve it. And so you were using the word solution correctly, but I asked my audience, I says, what's the definition of a solution? And most people come up with finally an answer to a problem. So for a salesperson to be talking about an answer to a problem that the seller has never shared with them, that's a big no-no. And that causes that, what was the word you called it again, Allan?
Rip to trustophobia.
Rip?
Rip, R-I-P, rip to trustophobia.
Okay, yeah.
That's what it is.
Well, and I went down a wrong path with solution selling initially. Well, it wasn't a wrong path, but what I was trying to do, because we were selling something so complex and we were using salespeople that literally, because our complex product, they'd have to be with our company for 18 months before they finally fully understood what we were selling. And that time from data hire to solution expertise was so long that my idea was, let's have the smartest people in the company write the discovery questions for the salespeople. The discovery questions to diagnose the problem and the discovery questions to help create the vision of the solution. And the reason I got that idea was I thought about, if you go to a doctor for the first time, never met the doctor before, how does that doctor establish his or her credibility with you as a patient? Now, if you were a doctor, Allan, and you could turn around and say, well, there's my degree from Columbia Medical School, and there's my degree from, Carnegie Mellon, and, all of that. A lot of doctors have their glory wall up there, but in truth, as a patient, most of us finally come to the emotional conclusion that I trust this doctor and this doctor's really smart based on the discovery or diagnostic questions they ask us. After they keep asking us intelligent questions we're capable of answering, all of a sudden you go, oh, this lady knows her shit. So I feel good about it, right? But what I missed was the slime of the salesperson title on the card. Because if you go to a doctor, you will allow them to start asking discovery questions right off. If you went to a tax accountant, you'd allow that tax accountant to start asking you discovery questions right at the get-go. But if their title says salesperson, all that historical baggage comes up. And so the key to getting past all that historical baggage, and it took me years, was story, a peer story. So if I tell you a 60-second peer story, at the end of that 60 seconds, you come to the emotional conclusion that, wow, this guy might be 20 years younger than me, but he understands how hard my job is. This person feels to me to be authentic. They feel to me like they've got character. They've helped somebody in a position like me. He knows what my problems are. And that story opens up the whole thing.
So one of the things that I really thought was an interesting story, Mike, that you talked about is there's this timeline where a salesperson, when they're new, they're better at this story application, but they come to this point where they get to know everything, and then their sales stall.
You're exactly right, and that's what Neil Rackham, the behavioral researcher, found, that Xerox would hire these new batches of salespeople out of top 10 colleges every year. They put them through 6 weeks of product training, kick them out of the nest, and say, go sell for Xerox. And they get better and better and better and better and better. But at 18 months, each class, you could set your watch by it, they would peak and drop. And you know what the concept of the Goldilocks zone is with our solar system?
No.
Where the Earth is in the Goldilocks zone. In other words, we've got water and not too much heat and not too much cold, where life can really grow. And the planets closer to the sun are too hot, and the planets past us are too cold. So the Goldilocks zone is the ideal zone.
Just right.
Just right. Well, these new salespeople, they hit their Goldilocks zone of selling about 16 to 18 months in, where they were still not jumping on problems and saying, here's what you need, but they finally had enough solution expertise to do a great job of diagnosing and creating a vision and making the sale. But then they passed that 18 months where now their quota and their impatience and their enthusiasm get the best of them. Because if you got a big quota and you go out and you meet a buyer and the buyer starts admitting problems to you that you know you've got the perfect solution for, what happens to most salespeople? They get excited. They start calculating the commission in their head. They start visualizing the Hawaii trip. They go, oh, this is out of whack. This is out of whack. Here's what you need. So Neil Rackham said, when your expertise plus your enthusiasm get combined as a salesperson, it becomes your enemy. And so that's what Steve was referring to. And so what we're teaching people now is when they admit a problem to you and you know you have the solution, tamper down your enthusiasm and say, can I share a story with you about another customer of mine that had that exact same problem? They will never say no to that story. And if you've got the patience to slow it down, now you can take your new buyer through the buy process of your existing customer where they were struggling with this and struggling with that. And then they finally discovered this. And 18 months ago, they decided to give us a chance to help them with it. And here we are today, and this is better, and this is better, and this is better. But enough about me, what's going on here? And that story's magic. That's how that story is how I filled my pipeline as a rookie salesperson and sold more than anybody in the history of the company in my first 5 months.
And you realized that story, that was your epiphany as a rookie. You realized that that's what I need to do to be successful. Was it tangible or was it something?
I did it intuitively. And
you did. Okay.
Yeah. And when they'd say to me, well, Mike, you had such a great year, tell everybody what you're doing. And
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm just going out making friends. But what they were all trained to do was demo the product. You couldn't graduate from product school back then until you could demo all the applications. So, and most of these guys came from IBM because our CEO came from IBM. And so even though they're 35 to 45 years old, experienced, top-notch IBM salespeople, this new product was nothing like they sold at IBM. So they graduate from demo school. On the first sales call, they go out and say, hey, Allan, Mike Bosworth of Xerox Computer Services, can I give you a demonstration of our MRP system? And they lead with the demo because we taught them that. That's what product marketing teaches salespeople to do, is show the product.
Well, you're going to appreciate this, Mike, because this is a story, and it's amazing how our paths are so similar. So when I was in my 20s, my first sales job was in-home sales selling sunrooms. I had to go into a house and within 2 hours try to sell a $40,000 sunroom.
Yeah.
For one call closed. If you didn't sell it, you couldn't follow up with the customer. You lost the customer. And I went out to Buffalo, New York. I'll never forget it. For 10 days of product training. We were out there for 10 miserable, awful days learning about the thickness of the aluminum, the screws we use, the glass, the roof, all of that. And the last day this is how you present the information. Not how you sell it. This is how you present it. And then at the end, the customers will be so excited, they're going to want to buy because you told them about the product. And what I learned, I tried that first couple months. I'm just doing product demos, and I was closing 25% like everyone else. And then one day I was thinking to myself, I don't give a crap about any of this stuff. These people want to know what it feels like to sit in a sunroom.
Especially in Buffalo, New York.
That's in Buffalo, New York. Yeah, exactly. And I would say, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, imagine sitting in your backyard with a cup of coffee, looking outside the glass of your new sunroom, watching the birds. That's all I needed to say. And then if it was an engineer, I'd go over the product. But most people could care less about the product. and my closing went up to 60 to 70%, and I was the only one doing that. And like you though, I was like, it was intuitive. It wasn't something that I was taught. Yeah.
Right. You were just, your degree of empathy and whatever allowed you to put yourself in their shoes and figure out, especially if you're making a sales call in January in Buffalo, New York, where the sun's out, but it's 20 below, and say, imagine being in your backyard right now, watching those robins and stuff, or those cardinals and stuff, but being warm.
Right. Yeah. And that's all they cared about. They didn't care about, the thickness of the aluminum or the roof R value. It was just, it's crazy. And you're so right. Like that's what product marketing does, is they teach you the product, and they don't teach you how to sell it. So,
well, they think
they think they do, right?
But what they're relying on is, did you ever read Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm?
I have not.
Well, what he was talking about are high-tech startups in Silicon Valley that start off gangbusters, and then the bottom falls out. And with analysis, if you look at a bell curve of a market, where you've got innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards, that bell curve. If you create a better mousetrap, most startup companies are started by some smart engineer or scientist or something who comes up with an innovation. And then if he or she is really smart, they'll add to their team immediately a really good finance person and a real good sales and marketing person, right? And so they create this product, and then they hire some smart people to do white papers, and then they go out and start hitting trade shows and demoing their new, magic mousetrap. And 13% of the people who go up at that trade show and look at that product, the innovators and early adopters, will look at that and say, son of a gun, I've been waiting for somebody to build something like this. Right? And they get it and they buy it because they form their own buying vision. But the rest of the market doesn't know why they need it or how they're going to use it. And so what happens is these new companies start off like this, and then when they run out of innovators and early adopters, buyers who can create their own buying vision, it falls out because the rest of the market is unable to create their own buying vision for that new product. And that's where we really need stories for the early majority, stories of how the early market used it. And in the early 90s, Microsoft hit the chasm on Office. When they brought out Microsoft Office, integrating the spreadsheets and the word processor and the presentation tools, all that, took off gangbusters. And then they hit a chasm. And they somehow found out about me, and they hired me and my team to go out and interview their early market buyers of Office. We interview the construction companies and the dentist's office and the flower shops and all the small businesses that bought Office because they were smart enough to see that it could really help them. But Microsoft had no clue how those early market buyers were using Office in their businesses to make money, save money, achieve goals, and solve problems. And so they hired me and my team to go out and retroactively interview them to see if we could come up with customer usage stories so we could sell to the rest of the market. And so what we had to do to create those stories, we learned the first thing is I go out and I say, Steve, Microsoft has hired me to come out here and help understand how you're using Office in your business to run your business better. And the first question is, so show me, how are you using Microsoft Office? And so in other words, we get right into the usage first. Oh, so you're telling me now that you can close your books in 5 days faster than you used to? And you're finding out this, and you're just finding out which products are most profitable, and you just discovered the best season for bringing out new products, and whatever discoveries that customer had come up with in their business. And then here's the key to the story then. So how did you do it before you had Office? So now we have to take them from their current usage. They're very happy with it, and think back to how did you determine your profitability before you had Microsoft Office, and get them to talk about the struggle of the old way. And once we extracted the usage and the struggle of the old way, now we could create customer usage stories for dental offices and construction companies and stuff. And those stories allowed the Microsoft to go out and take the rest of the market. But they needed those customer usage stories. And that's one story I had as a rookie MRP salesman. I personally experienced that guy's customer usage story, and I shared that story with every other materials manager I met. Mm-hmm. Because they can't. When you're selling something that's new, that's different, that's innovative, you know, a very small percentage of your market can figure it out on their own.
That's great stuff.
Michael, you've been a great guest, man. You've written these books, radical topics like customer-centric selling. Boom. Solution selling, what great salespeople do. And it's just being interested and understanding what your folks that you want to help are going through. What's one question you want to answer today that we didn't ask you?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah,
that's the most honest answer we've got, Steve.
What did you say, Allan?
I said that was the most honest answer we've gotten every time he asked that question. I don't know. Some people are stressed out, like, oh my God, I have to come up with an answer here. And you're like, I don't know. That's great. So, Mike, before we go, I want you to touch on the one thing I did see that was really cool is you've now, you've taken your sales acumen and everything you're doing and talk about Reconcile. You now take this concept into the relationship and with your wife, right? And what's that about? How do you help people with their relationships?
Well, we're in the process now. My wife is a brilliant couples therapist, and she knew that most couples need help. Most couples can't afford couples therapy, and most men would rather have a cold barium enema than go to a therapist. So, and even men who go to therapy won't tell their friends. It's so shameful, right? So, yeah. So couples need help, and she wrote this system, but it was a desktop application, and it was kind of like learning from the Encyclopedia Britannica. We had to go level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and people don't want that. Our couples want to be able to do it on their mobile device, and they want to be able to go on any topic they want. You want to go on your sex life, and Steve wants to go on conflict, and Mary wants to go on whatever. So we're rewriting it, and we're in the middle of it. We're hoping to bring out a true. It's going to be like going from learning from the Encyclopedia Britannica to Google. In other words, we're going to make it that much easier, and it's probably May or June. We're going to see the new Reconcile mobile device app, and I'm really getting excited about it. But the thing about Reconcile that's contributed to my story practice is we teach people to do 3 things with using story as a framework. We teach people how to build a story that works, how to tell that story, which takes practice, and the third piece is how to tend your buyer's story using the same model. So if I'm tending your story and you give me something out, I say, that goes in the struggle bucket. Oh, that goes in the potential solution bucket. Oh, that one goes in the success metrics bucket. So the story tending piece, tending the other person, came out of Reconcile. And so Jennifer's work actually was the basis for me being able to teach salespeople how to tend their buyer story, because as a therapist, she has to tend the stories of her patients and clients.
Boom.
Right?
Boom is right.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
And the other interesting thing is that stereotypically speaking, most extroverts are good storytellers, but most introverts are much better at story tending. Most therapists are introverts. You know, they have the patience to tend the story. And in our workshops, the best storyteller we ever had in an open workshop, he was a CEO of a pump company up in Minnesota, was the worst listener we ever had. So he had the best storytelling and the worst story tending natural abilities that we'd seen. And so it seems like when people come to our workshops, the introverts love it because we teach them how to connect with a stranger, which is very painful for them, and how to use a story to gain trust and make connection. And for the extroverted salespeople, where they've been telling stories their whole life, every time they go out to a bar, they've told 100 stories. To slow them down and teach them how to tend the customer story. Because the real key to connection is to tend the customer's story and then play it back to them. Let me see if I got you here, Steve. This is, you've been doing it this long and you're struggling with this. And what you'd really like to figure out is the way to do A, B, and C. Did I get you? And when the salesperson goes back and says, did I get you? And the buyer says, yes. Now you've earned the right to take your product out. Now I can say, well, I believe we can help you with that, but don't take my word for it. I'd like an opportunity to prove it to you. And again, we're getting back into sync with how people want to buy.
Well, Mike, I want to have a beer with you. So when we get out, whenever I come to, what island do you live on?
Orcas Island.
Orcas Island. So Steve and I are coming out to Orcas Island so we can go out for a beer.
Let's do it, man.
And tell stories. Yeah. But we got to wrap it up. So before we say goodbye, Mike, if people want to say hello to you or reach out or even find out about Reconcile, how do they do that? Where do they go?
LinkedIn is really easy. Mike Bosworth on LinkedIn. It's got yeah. I'd say that's the easiest these days. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to personally thank you. Everything you spoke about today has been right up my alley. Love your whole philosophy. It's been awesome. Thanks for what you've contributed to the whole sales universe. It's been it's pretty special stuff. So I want to thank you personally for being on. And Steve, you have any final thoughts for the audience?
No, Mike, this is great to have you on. I really appreciate it. Love the Reconcile stuff as well.
Yeah.
And I love the therapeutic approach to tending the story. That was I learned something there. So that's excellent. So thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun. It's fun being a sales philosopher.
All right, we're going to wrap up the human factor here. This is for Al Langer. For Steve Brown, this is Al Langer. Steve, any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, we're going to see you next week. We'll have another great guest, and we appreciate you. So stay tuned.
All right, guys. Have a great weekend. We'll see everybody next week.
That's a wrap.